Yeah, so I thought the book was very good.
You don't have you've got the review copy, but whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Had a very interesting ending. It kind of took me by surprise. I thought he was going to go more to the go towards the well, especially when the guy says mind your own business, and they didn't know who it was. I thought, oh man, this could turn. I mean, this could be a next book.
Well, we've got a sequel, so
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we are online. Folks, good morning. Thank you for joining us. You are watching KUHS The Stream on Melody Drive. This is the Weekend Boost, and I am your host, Paul Lane, author of The Caregiver's Handbook, a self-help love story. Today, we have a very special guest, and it's a very interesting topic. It's so interesting because I've been getting a lot of fiction authors lately, and I really appreciate that because it's a genre that I've really never been able to appreciate as much as I have now, and I'm grateful that I've had this opportunity. Before we get started, I just want to just remind you of a couple of guests that we've had back in recent history. Todd Fonestock wrote, this is his 19th novel, The Fetch, and it's a very interesting fantasy novel, and that's really Todd's specialty. Looking forward to having him back on the show. Dennis Ty. Actually, Dennis is the one who introduced me to Ona, and Dennis, if you're watching, thank you so much. I loved your book, and I love the book that I'm reading now that I just finished. But Dennis wrote The Last Ride, a fictional novel of 5 guys that were all over 60 who decided to ride their motorcycles to Mexico, all terminally ill. Fantastic read. I've had so many wonderful guests on my show. One of them was a shaman. Karina Cariñosa wrote the book Enlighten the Fuck Up. Tough title, but a very interesting read. If you're looking for enlightenment, if you consider, if you're curious about who you are, where you are in this life, very, very awesome, deep read, solid book. Last, I want to talk about Donna Denome's book, 8 Keys to Wholeness. I read this at night when I'm going to bed. I just love this book because it just has so much to do with aligning your chakras and understanding yourself on a personal level. And so Donna Denome, I also will be having her back on the show sometime soon. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Yes, great to have you. So this is your 3rd book.
Actually, my 4th.
Your 4th.
Yes, my 4th. So, and it's a departure from my first 3 books, which were historical mysteries, meaning that there were murders and a sleuth and all of that. But this was a departure. One of the characters from my last book, Rule of Capture, spoke to me and needed to have his story told. So that was that's why I wrote Son of Nothingness.
Son of Nothingness. The more I read this, the more the title became relevant to me, and I really appreciated that you really did some stretching to write this novel, because it's about a Latino man in the 1940s who is an attorney, which it's very out of the box. I mean, even in today's thinking, it's very out of the box. And this young man, or this gentleman, changed his name from Andres Martinez to Andrew Martin, and Esquire, and he has a life of opulence. He has all of the good things in life, and he's very, very blessed. And as I read the book, I don't think he ever grasps his stature or his position in life, and he doesn't really appreciate it as much as I, as a viewer, did.
Well, he's tormented by his past, as many of us are. How the past influences the present and the future, and he has to first deal with that past in order to then appreciate what he has and what he had. First, he has to come to terms with that past, and that involved his father, who in the prior book was actually an advocate for farm workers. And his father was really at being the forefront of the unions for agricultural workers. And because he was so passionate about his work, he neglected his son. So he loved his son, but he was more concerned about the cause rather than his family. And that did a number on Andres, who needed his father because he had some psychological issues. His mother, as we learn later, had reasons for it, but she abandoned him. So he had problems that he had to work through in order to come to terms with his with what he was blessed with.
Yes, it was very, very. I guess his position to me was controversial because when he was an attorney, he was a Republican, and Latinos typically are not, not Republican. And so as I read that, that was really, just a great twist. I thought it really added a lot to it. There was a scene in the book where he was talking to some migrants, and he told them, "I'm Carlos Martinez's son," and they were like, and so it really brought his position or his father's validity. I think he probably saw it from a different perspective he'd never seen before.
Well, one of the things he was doing was really, in becoming an advocate for becoming a corporate, of course, being an attorney, period, for a Latino was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And part of his rebellion against his father was to be everything that his father was not.
Yes.
And of course, his father was, a liberal.
An organizer, yes.
And an organizer. And so his father was all those things. And so what could he do to be what his father was not? He becomes a lawyer and is an advocate for, corporate America.
Yes.
And is also, he embraces all those values. But of course, he ends up discovering that, some of the reasons why he was drawn to that. He also wanted to obviously serve in the World War II.
Yes.
And that was his rejection from that set him on the sort of journey that he goes on through the book. Mm-hmm. But his father would have been again against that too.
Yes.
So he's trying in every way to separate himself from his father, mm-hmm. and his heritage.
Yes. That's so interesting because I've seen that so many times in my life, Latino men and women who want to separate themselves from their heritage. And I call it internalization of inferior status, placed upon by the establishment. But it's an interesting dynamic, and it's a reality in the Latino culture. And some call it assimilation, and some call it whitewashing. So, there's a lot of different variations or views, perspectives of such an action, and so
yeah.
I thought that really brought such an interesting dynamic to it because, when he was talking to the people and they pulled out the bottle of mezcal, it was almost like there was these two individuals within him that were just bumping heads. For me, that's what I got perceived from that.
Absolutely, and I think what I was trying to represent there was the struggle of a lot of hyphenated Americans.
Yes.
I, being a Jewish American, have experienced anti-Semitism, and I grew up in Whittier, California, which hometown of Richard M. Nixon,
mm-hmm.
And so we were the only Democrats on the block, and
wow.
the only Jewish people among just a few in Whittier at that time, and I experienced pretty severe anti-Semitism and felt like an outsider
mm-hmm.
Most of my life,
mm-hmm.
and so as an outsider. If we don't identify with other outsiders, we've got a problem. We need to. The Jewish community has always been, for example, supporters of the African American community because we've always understood. At least we should be.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We've always understood that we have something in common. That we have to struggle to. We have to fight our way into the world.
Absolutely.
And the Latino component for me is personal because I have Latino family members. My daughter is married to a Chicano. I have grandchildren who are part Jewish and part Latino. We call them Jewicans or Mexi-Jews. And my son lives in Mexico City and is engaged to a Mexican woman. So there's a personal component there for me too.
Mm-hmm. I have to read this. In the closing comments, I thought that this was really an interesting author's note. There's a heated debate in literary circles today regarding who should be able to speak for whom. Specifically, are authors justified in portraying characters of backgrounds, race, class, gender, etc., different from their own? The question is valid, given literary's history and the exclusive domain of white men. The playing field has been long in need of some leveling. As a Jewish woman with grandchildren of mixed race, I understand the concerns. I grappled with it in writing this book as my protagonist is Latino. My own answer centers on intent. What is the author trying to achieve in writing from a perspective from the other? In my case, I was trying to inhabit a character from my previous book, then a young man, now an adult. I was trying to understand him, to walk in his shoes, as indeed I was for the rest of the characters, none of whom share my identical experience. It will be for the readers to decide whether the portrayals ring true. So I really appreciated that because, you know, it really gives a lot of explanation and understanding that you really are really stepping outside of yourself and trying to see from the eyes of another. And I love how you wrote, I was trying to get to know this guy. So it's almost like you've not only created him, but he's evolving, creating something new every chapter.
Yes, and I appreciate you reading that author's note because it's a real concern for a lot of writers today. And you know, me being an academic, I was you know, taught literature at the college level for many years, and was inculcated in grad school about this idea of becoming aware of one's identity, one's subjectivity, and how that colors, you know, what we write and how we interpret texts and so forth. So we all bring our own experience to bear. And sometimes we're blinded by our own prejudices, our own you know, way of thinking about the world that, and we don't always see it. Like, you know, we don't always see we have blinders onto our own biases.
Absolutely, preconceived notions.
Yes, preconceived notions, and so I appreciated that from academia, that I learned about how to think about myself in that kind of way. On the other hand, it can be carried to an extreme where you are stifled and paralyzed and don't feel like you can write about anybody else's experience because it's not going to be authentic. And this is one of the questions, you know, I have my own interview show that I do with authors. It's one of the questions that I've asked other authors also. I actually interviewed a Mexican-American woman who asked her that question, you know, and to a person, everyone answered similarly, that if you are representing that experience with affection,
yes,
and with an effort to trying to really understand what it's like to be that person, really empathy, you know, it's about empathy, right? It's about true empathy is really walking in someone else's shoes. You may not agree with that view. You may not relate to everything, but you try to understand what they're going through. And as long as people are trying to do that, then I think we should be able to write about anything, because from as long as you can go back to the beginning of writing, people have, you know, men have always written about women's experience. You know, we never questioned that. So
that is profoundly true. I appreciate that. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So I just was saying that it's an important consideration. I felt compelled to tell this man's story. He was my character. I invented him, and I wanted to really follow it through to the end. And of course, now in my next book that I'm writing, which is a mystery, and he appears again. He's evolved again, right? And I'll follow him through to wherever he takes me. You know, and yeah.
So that's one complexity. Another, you know, we discussed it, you know, during the week when we spoke about writing historical fiction is such a challenging enterprise, because there's so much research that's involved in it. And you have to put some your imagination in that in order for it to become, you know, to be real. And so, you know, we talked about Lucky Strikes. You know, when we first met this Salvation Army woman, Penny, it just struck me that he remembered the smell of Lucky Strikes on her. You know, and at a time that was the norm. You know. Yeah.
The historical, you know, for me, and I think for many writers of historical fiction, we love doing the research. You know, this is our passion. And my doctorate is in 19th century American literature. I spent years in the archives with microfilm back then and microfiche, and we didn't have the internet. so I, you know, I spent time in the real library, and I loved it. I loved doing that. And so, and when you love it, you know, you want to get it right. You want to get those details right. And so the challenge is weaving the details in without bombarding readers with those details, because then it becomes an information dump.
Yes,
we call
almost a documentary.
Yeah, and then readers, you know, you're gonna lose readers. You have to have enough, and that's part of the skill, is weaving in the details enough so that it helps to tell the story, but that it doesn't become an information dump. So but I love it, you know, and I think it's a thrill to be part of it. I think I was telling you that with regard to the Lucky Strike.
Yes.
My last book, readers will be very. They'll hold you to the fire.
They'll scrutinize.
Hold your feet to the fire with that, because I did talk about Lucky Strikes, and I didn't do my research properly, and got the color of the cigarette box wrong, because I always thought it was red, but in the 1920s, when my book was set, it was actually green. So sometimes you do get it wrong, but I try my best to get those details correct.
This character was so dynamic. I mean, he was, you know, he was part detective. Oh my gosh, I don't want to give too much of the book away, but you know, when he met with his friend John, and you know, his honored friend, and you get into the book, and all of a sudden you start finding the details about how Andrew is in a relationship with this other man's wife, and oh my gosh, I got to tell you, that floored me. And I don't know why. You know, he was a good-looking guy, kind of Gregory Peck looking, and you know, a very tall guy, and so. You know, I guess when I started out, I thought that, you know, you think that this is a man of high integrity, and he's you know, above reproach, and yet when you read, you start realizing that he's a human. He's just a person.
Yes, and he's very human, all too human. And that's part of, you know, his affair with Cece, the wife. It is. You know, is in part his, you know, that's where he actually has something to do with his father, right? Because his father, and he recognizes it, you know, that his father was kind of a womanizer, and that's the one thing he can't shed. Like, that's the one thing that he has in common with his father, and it's also part of why he's, you know, he's broken. I mean, he's a broken man.
Yes.
And he's trying to find solace. He's trying to find escape from himself. And one of the ways he tries to escape himself is by having, you know, romances with whoever. But the other thing is his leg.
Yes, Cotard's.
Cotard's disease. Which is a manifestation of a physical manifestation of his psychological turmoil.
This is a true condition?
It is a true condition, and I learned about it. I was picking up my husband at the airport. I was sitting in the, you know, the waiting area in the terminal, and I was listening to public radio. And there was a story that came on. I mean, an excerpt that came on about this book called "The Man That Wasn't There," and it was a book about this ailment. Cotard syndrome, which people have. They have it in varying degrees, but it can go from simply feeling like a part of your body doesn't belong to you, to your entire body doesn't belong to you, to you are dead already. And it is a terrible psychological ailment. Some people have amputated their limbs because of it. Some people have killed themselves because of it. So it's a terrible ailment, but it's related to a feeling of disassociation from your identity. You know, it involves identity. So
yes.
I heard this, and I was trying to think of something. I was already writing my book, and I was trying to think of a way to symbolically represent Andrew's struggle.
Yes.
And I heard this and I said, that's it. I'm going to give him Cotard syndrome. and so that's something about how writers work also, is you never know where your idea is going to come from, where something, you can be listening in on a conversation, you can be observing something, and you'll get that, something will click in you that says, this is going to work for me in my storytelling.
Yes.
That was how and I bought the book immediately, read the book, and then that became part of the novel.
It's interesting because this Cotard's disease just really weighed on him throughout the book. I mean, there's a time when he really made the decision that he was going to amputate his own leg, and I have to say that what you said earlier just rang true. The first thing that came to mind was, this man has an identity crisis, and I think you portrayed that very effectively in that he constantly went back and forth from Cece to his condition to his, he also has this other woman that's hounding him throughout the story, a Penny, who is trying to reach out to him and talk to him about his thought. He once thought his deceased mother, who happened to at that time be alive, and so there were so many things that were revolving around his confusion that really made him very believable as a character.
Well, I think, if you think about it, you look at anybody who's successful, and people. There's the story of Richard Cory, that the poem, the song that Paul Simon did. Richard Cory had everything. Richard Cory was rich. Richard Cory was benevolent. Richard Cory was loved by everyone. Richard Cory was, he was a great man in other people's eyes, right? But nobody knows what really goes on beneath the surface of people all people, but even those who appear to be very successful, right? The struggles that go on internally, the psychological struggles, and we all have them. We're all victims of them to one degree or another. And so I'm always interested in the psyche of the character. I mean, I'm interested in what drives them, what makes them who they are. And I'm always interested in developing empathy for my characters, even some of the worst ones, because, even the most horrible characters have something in them. What started that behavior? What led to them, turning into a monster? I'm always interested in that component. And so with Andrew, you start off and you see a man who's very, successful. But then as you learn about his backstory, you see what the complexity of the man.
Yes. He was very, very concerned with image, which is so, I think that's very, I thought it was relevant because, it made him strive to be more, because he had to always worry about his name in the newspaper and which cane he was wearing, and, it was always a symbol of how well he was doing in a case. And so, it just really all brought it all together. But I think his image was really something that he didn't even see in himself how important that was to him.
Yeah, and of course his bird knew, right?
Oh yeah,
his bird Emerson, who's the one character that shows, I think initially, at least what I'm trying to do is show this humanity. Because a lot of Andrew, what you see of him is cold. He's mercenary. He's mercenary in the courtroom. He's trying. He distances himself from his heritage. He just wants to strive. But Emerson, his parrot, is the one creature that he feels affection for. And so you see early on that he's capable of affection.
Yes.
Through an animal, through a bird. And the name Emerson is I chose it strategically because I was thinking of Waldo Emerson, the American 19th century American writer, who really is the quintessential American writer, and which Andrew names him Emerson because he sees himself as an American, right? He's an American, not
fully assimilated. Yeah, he's a fully assimilated American.
Yeah.
Hey folks, if you're just joining us, you're watching the Weekend Boost. This is KUHS The Stream on Malady Drive in Denver. We are talking to author Ona Russell, the author of Son of Nothingness, and we've been talking about some really interesting things. We're just in the middle of talking about his almost an alter ego, his Bert Emerson. I thought that was a great name too, by the way. When I first saw it, I said, "Oh yeah, well, Walter Emerson." I loved how the book delved into some really sensitive topics. Operation Paperclip. A lot of Americans don't realize what Operation Paperclip really was. Explain a little bit about that, and how did that become a part of the book?
Yeah, well, so early on in the novel, Andrew, alias Andres, is tasked with going to Sacramento to investigate a possible spy who's spying on communists. Now this is 1949, so this is the height of the un-American activities, where there were communists and Reds and Pinkos were, occupying and obsessed with the McCarthy era.
Yes.
And so Andrew was tasked with trying to uncover through it, because he was an investigator at one point too. So he's tasked with trying to see if this spy is living, if this is indeed this particular spy living in Sacramento, because the American government under Truman formulated this thing called Operation Paperclip, which brought ex-Nazis, if you want to call them ex, imported them into the United States to spy on suspected communists, which is just the craziest thing in the world, if you think about it. But the U.S. government was obsessed with finding communists, and because of the relationship of Germany to Russia, and there was, there were Germans that hated the Russians, so they had these great skills from being Nazis. The government said, well, we'll overlook all this other stuff, like, the Holocaust, and we will give them new identities. And the paperclip component of it was that they would actually have new papers,
new identities,
new identities, and they would paperclip the identities in paper, and they called it Operation Paperclip. This was bringing ex-Nazis, German ex-Nazis, into the country, giving them new identities so that they could then spy on communists.
Man.
So there were a lot of these, all peppered around the country. There were several spies, and I got that from a book that I read, The Nazi Next Door. And they were living, and since then there have actually been, there's been a documentary about one such individual that was then brought to Israel for trial and a number of things. But anyway, extradited is what the word I meant. Anyway, so my character is tasked with trying to uncover, see if this one person actually is this spy.
And this is a bad guy. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and so he's tasked with this, and for him, it's he views it as a way to redeem himself, because Andrew is rejected from, as I said before, rejected from serving in World War II because of his psychological problems, and this actually created more problems for him. So he ended up viewing it as a way to kind of redeem himself. That's part of his journey. Little does he know that it's kind of not going to work out the way he wanted it to, but that's part of his journey. And so, yeah, that's, part of writing historical fiction is to show what's going on in the times too, right? Is to have that context. And that was the context. Like, there was this obsessive focus on uncovering communists, and so that's one of the ways that I bring in the context to the story.
I did appreciate that, how you would just splash headlines in, and just it really fit very well, because it's almost as if in passing he's opening up the newspaper and he reads it and then he scans it and goes on, and it brought the times very much into, it was woven together very nicely. I like that.
Thank you. That's what again, that's one of the challenges for historical fiction writers. You want to you want to put the reader in the times. Yes. But you don't want to saturate them with it. So one way to do that is to say, have somebody read the paper and say, this is one of the headlines that was going on. My next book, the one I'm writing on now, is set in Andrews. It's a little bit later. It's 1954. And one of the big headlines and one of the components of the story has to do with Brown versus the Board of Education.
Oh, really?
Which had just passed. And so that is, and then also Roe v. Wade is a way, but the seeds of it are starting to germinate. Yes. And so we have those two issues actually are big components of my next book. But that actually helps frame the stories, and in this case, it happened to be the communists.
I felt like you just had so many topics that were so relevant. There was a point where you talked about women having abortions with a hanger, and man, that was so hard hitting, because that's not fiction. That's reality. And and I don't want to get political today, but we're at a point right now where we're not far from that having to be the norm again.
Well, this is okay. Okay, you got me on my soapbox, yeah. Yes, my grandmother tried to do this. She used a hanger and almost died. She got sepsis because of that, because there was she didn't have access to a legal abortion. The book I'm writing now is also one of the books that is informing this book, my novel, is a book called, I've got it right here, as a matter of fact.
Oh, cool.
It is called The Abortionist, a woman against the law. And one of the things that was happening at this time, and actually during the time of Son of Nothingness too, but more so in this time, was women who performed abortions. In other words, there were a lot of midwives who also performed abortions, and also there were a lot of men that performed abortions, a lot of male doctors who would do it on the side. Women that performed them, increasingly in the 1950s, were arrested and they went to trial and were convicted often and sent to jail. Even though they often performed the abortions more safely and with greater care than their male counterparts. And the male counterparts never went to jail.
Okay? Isn't that the worst?
So, and some of the, talk about some of the scenes in the courtroom that, this is what I'm writing right now, so of course I'm my head's all in this, but some of the scenes in the courtroom with interrogating some of these female abortionists, in addition to the women who had had abortions, were incredibly degrading, sexualized, where they would, the attorneys would say things that were clearly meant to arouse the male the men in the room. And it was so. This is one of my things that I'm working on. And I think one of the things that with novels, I teach a course called The Truth of Historical Fiction.
Oh, wow.
And in that course, my argument is that often in fiction, you can tell truths in a better way than you, or a more palatable way than you can in a straight history.
Mm-hmm.
That you can, that storytelling, I have a fellow writer who does a workshop on storytelling and talks about how storytelling is a more palatable way. Your natural resistance to certain kinds of information is diminished when you put your argument in the form of a story. And so I believe that it's one of the things I argue in my historical fiction class too, is that using fiction to tell truths is a way to get those truths out in a less controversial way,
Mm-hmm.
in a less argumentative way,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe it can change minds.
Wow.
That's actually what this friend of mine who does this marvelous workshop on storytelling and the benefits of it in advocacy for various causes.
Yes.
How you can use storytelling to for advocacy as opposed to just the straight recitation of facts.
Yes.
So
I raised my kids on that same premise. I was a big analogy person. And, I've always believed, okay, first of all, if you tell them a story, they're going to remember it more. If there's humor in it, they're going to even remember it more. But that was always my thinking, So when I saw that, it was like, well, cool, I like that.
That's yeah, exactly. That's exactly my friend's premise. I have to say his name. His name is Doug Williams because now I'm using his argument. But he does this incredible workshop. So. But I believe it, and I think that's true. A story is something that you remember. A story, as my friend argued, is will advance recall. You will recall it better than just with one fact after another.
Yep, the relevance just sinks in. I think it hits home, and like you say, you don't raise your defenses because it's not about you. It's just about this story that you're observing, and so I think that really makes a lot of sense. I wish we could use that to help people who don't want to get vaccinated.
Yes, this is what we need. We need some good story. Really, this is what we need. Okay, I have to be careful because I can get very passionate about these kinds of things.
Yeah, me too. Anyone who knows me knows that this is really my passion. And I don't know why I've always been drawn to the political.
Me too.
And it's a curse.
Me too. And I have to tell you because my daughter's father-in-law. Remember, I mentioned that he's Latino.
Yes.
He died from COVID. He died, and next week they're finally having a memorial for him, which we were supposed to attend, but we can't now because of Delta.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because of the people who would refuse to get vaccinated, I can't go to my family member's memorial who died from COVID.
Yeah.
So it's anyway.
Yeah, it's really a sad commentary, and yet here we are.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about. I'm so fascinated. How do you develop? I mean, did Andres just appear one day, or did you were writing a story and then all of a sudden this guy just came in and you said, I could use this guy, or how does that happen?
Well, again, it was from my prior book, which was set in 1927, Los Angeles. There was one of the things that my prior books have, I'm interested in the law. I'm interested in lawyers and the law, and I taught a course at UC San Diego called Literature and the Law, because I'm interested in I'm interested in the intersections between various disciplines. And so literature and the law, if you think about it, especially courtroom trial law, you're in the trial, you're telling stories, basically. An attorney is telling stories. An attorney got two competing stories. And it's who tells the best story that can often persuade the jury in how they tell it.
Certainly.
Well, I developed a course in which we look at books that have legal matters in them. We look at novels that are centered on the law, but also we discuss storytelling and how attorneys who know literature and know literary strategies can be more effective in the courtroom. Somebody like Clarence Darrow, for example, who was a master storyteller and incorporated literary references in his arguments and would often win because he was so good at it. So I developed this course, and that course I got accredited by the California Bar Association, which I then taught around the state to lawyers. So this book has a particular trial, Rule of Capture, my prior book, and that trial was there was a man named his name was C. Julian, C. Julian, and he owned a bunch of oil wells, and he ended up overissuing stock, and it was prior to the crash, but people ended up losing all kinds of money because of his scheme. Okay, and it was a huge, big deal, and there were 2 years of trials involved in this scheme. My sleuth, Sarah Kaufman, in my story ends up being the victim of one of these of this scheme, and she comes out from Ohio to Los Angeles to attend the trial. And I needed to, and again, I usually use the trial as a starting point. I'll find a trial that I find interesting, like in the book prior, I used the Scopes trial as my starting point. So then the question is, what's going on in 1927 in addition to that? And you had at that time a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, like you have now, and a lot of tension between Hispanics, Mexican Americans, and the white population. And I ended up developing a character who is Carlos Martinez, who is the father of Andre. They said he is the one, and there was the beginning of the union movement. Okay? So there was the beginning of that prior to Cesar Chavez, but sort of there was Germanation going on, and so I wanted to focus on that. And I had my sleuth ends up meeting Carlos Martinez,
I see.
And they develop a relationship, and it's my sleuth. She is, and there's a murder of a Latina woman, Latina, and she ends up her own. And I was talking about earlier with you, her own preconceptions, her own assumptions about who she is. She thinks that she's Jewish, she's liberal, she's open-minded, she's a very accomplished woman. She thinks of herself as being above the fray, that she's tolerant. There's nobody that she doesn't have any prejudices. That's put to the test in that novel.
Oh, cool.
And, okay, so she then has to examine her own biases. And so she has an affair with Carlos, and then it goes down. They have a long thing, but she meets his son, Andres, so then Andres is a troubled boy, a troubled young man, and then she gets attached to him because she's actually works in the juvenile court system, and this was based on reality. This was a real woman who really was. In that position in Ohio, and she really was involved with the juvenile court system. So she gets attached to him, and that's how he was born. He was born in my imagination from Carlos.
Okay.
Who was also born in my imagination. But I think the personal component of my life, the fact that I have a lot of Hispanics in my life, and I observe the relationships, and I observe how they have influenced me, and what struggles they've had. I'm curious about working through those, you know.
I thought it was really, really dynamic because, you know, it had a lot of, like I said, it had a lot of dimensions in it. It had a lot, I mean, Andres is a very complex individual who, you know, he's very opinionated in his, you know, in his beliefs, and he, you know, and he really had to come to terms with that in the end, you know, and Penny comes back with a, I'm not going to say anymore. All I will say that the ending was, I thought it was a great ending, you know. I thought, hey, finally he found some peace, you know.
Yes, yes. He finally finds some peace, but, you know, some of the endings that are too simplistic are unrealistic to some extent. So in the next book, you know, he's still quite a bit better, but he's not cured, okay? Because it's not that simple to give up or to change your entire being that you've lived all your life. You can get better, but there's still these things that haunt you, and Andres, he's better, but he's still haunted, and what he does in order to kind of help himself through that is some of the subject of the next book that he's working on. But that one's a murder mystery, so. Cool.
He really, there's a part toward the end of the book where he really manifested a full-blown case of this catarrhs where he said, I'm just gone, I'm invisible.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I thought that was really great because it really, you know, you just really touched on it in the beginning. I mean, you talk about it all through the book, how he would poke his leg and look for blood, you know, like, is his leg there? You know, he'd stand there to see if he's really standing on it. And I mean, it really made it a real condition that I could really visualize, you know.
Well, the people that suffer from it really do those
to that extent.
So,
yes.
So that was you know, that was based on all of the research I did. People really do try to amputate, self-amputation. Really do try, you know, and they do really feel like the one word I used in the novel, which was based on what I read, was they feel like they're dissolving. You know, they feel like their bodies are dissolving. And that has such relevance to me for identity, you know, when you feel detached from, you know, at least, you know, if you've ever had any kind of psychological problem like I have, okay, you know, when you're at your low, when you're at your real low, and you feel like, who am I? You know, I think all of us kind of have that at some point where we figure, you know, we're trying to figure out who we are as human beings and what we're meant to do and so forth. You can feel like you're not there. You know, you can feel like you're kind of dissolved.
Oh yeah.
And so with Andrew, he has to, that dissolution has to then come back, you know, and reform. And he's still in my novel now, still reforming.
Yeah, he's always reaching out, trying to pull himself in there.
Yeah.
You know, I could relate to that so much because when I was 14, my mom told me, you know, your dad wasn't Lane. Your dad was actually a man named Mal Duran, you know. And so I was in a Latino family, a Latino, you know, Chicano neighborhood with a white last name. And so, you know, when I talk to people about, you know, understanding racism, I've seen it from both sides, man. You know, I was a brown kid. I wasn't accepted by the white group. I really wasn't, you know, and I had a very difficult time fitting into a Chicano Latino group too. So, you know, that identity crisis stuck with me for many years. And so to see, you know, someone in that kind of a struggle, it really, it brings it home for me. I think I can relate to it. I can really see it from a different perspective.
That's really interesting, Paul, that you had that experience. I have my experience that is also, and this is something probably we haven't touched on, but how much autobiography is in writing, you know, is in fiction, or is it in, like, we all put ourselves, you know, even if we don't think we do, we're there. The unconscious works, you know, in our novels, and the home for unwed mothers that is in the book is the home that my mother was in when she was 15.
Wow.
Had a baby out of wedlock, who she subsequently gave up for adoption, who then 25 years, 30 years later, re-entered our lives.
Oh, cool.
And so I have a half brother that I didn't know about for many years, and his struggles as someone who was searching for his mother all his life, and so that also influences my writing. What I want to kind of work out and work through. So
tell me, Ona, I know that there are viewers here who are considering maybe one day writing a book. There's probably someone who tunes in every week and says, oh, I'm going to get that spark one day. I'm going to write a book. And I believe there is a book in everyone.
Yes.
What advice would you have for someone who's thinking about it and just putting it off and putting it off?
It sounds very simplistic. My comment is write. Sit down, get a journal, and write every day. Write it every day. Write every day. And if you're still writing, if you're writing, after several months and you're still writing, and you feel like you have a story to tell, then get involved in some organization or some program, some class on writing the kind of book you want to write. You need some structure. There are rules about writing. There are realities about writing. You can't just think that because you've got a story to tell, that it's going to magically appear. You have to do the work. And the work requires that you accept that you've got to learn how to do it. You've got to learn how to do it right. You've got to know that if you want to have a good book, it's got to be edited properly. You have to know that you're going to be doing revisions after revisions after revisions. You know that you're going to be rejected by a lot of people. You have to face the realities of it, which I say I didn't do because I just dove in head first, and it took me like years to figure out what I had done wrong. And so I'm just saying those are the things that if somebody had told, somebody said, you better do this before you jump to the thing that, I just want to have the book out there published. So you have to be patient, persistent, and learn how to do it, because you can learn to write. And that's what I would suggest, is just really being methodical about how you go about it. And then you have to have the passion. You've got to have the will and the passion and know that your story is worth telling. And also, don't think about the end result too much, like, am I going to sell 1,000, or thousands of copies of this? If you go there, it's not going to work. You have to do it because you love it. You have to do it because you love it.
That's right. Thank you. That was very, very helpful. I think that, like I say, I know that there's someone out there. Hey, by the way, folks, wherever you are, give us a shout out and let us know where you are. We have an international camera and a Facebook camera in the studio, and we know we go all the way to Uzbekistan and, Austria, and we go all over the world. And so, give us a shout out. Let us know where you are. And Ona's literature and her writings are definitely something that's here to stay. We've been talking about the Son of Nothingness. Ona Russell has been our guest author. And Ona, I got to tell you that, I think that it's so important that you do stretch from yourself, and I really do appreciate that you've written this book from the perspective of someone who is a male. I love it. I love the concept. I love the knowing that two of the top 3 most powerful human beings on earth are female. I'm with that, man. I don't care what anyone says. I'm ready for a female president. I'm tired of the male ego being in charge and not listening to the voice of others. And with that, I will stop that document. That's the topic.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it's been really nice having you. I mean, it's been really great. Folks, if you were looking for a copy of this book, it is soon to be released, correct?
Oh, no, it's out.
Oh, it's out. Okay.
Yeah.
Son of Nothingness. Rule of Capture. And the first one was
Well, I had the first one was O'Brien's Desk. The second one was the Natural Selection.
The Natural Selection.
Then Rule of Capture, and then Son of Nothingness. And you can go onarussell.com.
Yes.
And see what I do, or you can go to Amazon, or you can order it through your local bookstore, which I like to do through independent bookstores.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Folks, stay tuned. Mr. International, Paul Chavez is going to be coming up with deep cuts. And I got a new motto for my show, and it's this. If you can't, everyone's looking for a hero. And if you can't find one, be one. Ona, thank you for being a hero.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really enjoyed this conversation.
It was great. It was really great having you. Hey, we'll talk to you soon. When you get your next book written, come back on.
Thank you so much.
All righty, folks. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.